Welcome to Bedtime Empires, where history drifts into dreams. Settle in, close your eyes, and let the stories of empires past carry you gently to sleep. If you enjoy these quiet journeys through time, please consider subscribing, leaving a like, and sharing a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Sweet dreams. And let's begin. From conqueror to sage, the story of Ashoka the Great and the Maurya Empire. The sun rose slowly over the plains of Magadha, casting golden fingers across the stone spires of Pataliputra. A warm mist clung to the Ganges River, veiling the capital in a sacred glow. Merchants were already opening their stalls. Priests offered morning chants. Elephants lumbered beneath banners of red and gold. But inside the palace, past sandalwood halls and polished marble courtyards, a child's scream pierced the calm. "Let go of me," the boy shouted. "I said let me go." Two guards struggled to hold the prince as he kicked and flailed in the arms of his nursemaid. "You're late for weapons training again, Your Highness," the older one grunted, gripping the young prince's wrist. "Your father will have our heads." Ashoka, only 12, with wild black hair and a glint in his storm-gray eyes, tore himself free and sprinted down the corridor. He knew every passageway, every blind turn of the palace, from years of exploration and evasion. He darted beneath a silk tapestry, slid behind a carved column, and disappeared down a servant's stair. By the time the guards reached the courtyard, he was already in the stables, tugging on a bowstring with the string of a half-made smile creeping onto his face. He hated court rituals, hated being compared to his older half-brothers, especially Sumana and Mahendra, who bore the polished mannerisms of royal heirs. They always sat straight, always bowed, always whispered like snakes. Ashoka did not. He was rough, clever, strong for his age, the son of Subhadrangi, a Brahmin concubine, not royal enough to inherit, yet not low enough to ignore. And yet, his father, Emperor Bindusara, had taken a special interest in him. Later that evening, the emperor called Ashoka to the inner chamber. His beard was streaked with silver. A peacock-feathered turban framed his gaunt face. "Why must I always hear of you through complaints, boy?" Bindusara asked, swirling a goblet of wine. "You fight your brothers. You run from tutors. You show no respect to ministers." Ashoka knelt, eyes down. "Because I do not respect them." The room fell silent. One of the ministers coughed. Another glared. Bindusara chuckled. "Come here." Ashoka stood and stepped forward, straight-backed. "You speak plainly," the emperor said. "That is rare and dangerous." He leaned closer. "Tell me, boy, do you want to rule one day?" Ashoka's eyes flicked to the side. "I want to fight. I want to command armies. I want to make my own fate." "Good," Bindusara said, rising to his feet. "Then go to Takshashila. The city is in revolt. Let's see how well you handle fire when thrown into it." Gasps rippled through the court. Sending a boy, barely a man, to quell a rebellion? Ashoka did not flinch. "I'll leave at dawn," he said. And so he did. The road to Takshashila stretched over 500 leagues through forest, desert, and hostile terrain. Ashoka rode at the head of a modest battalion, 500 cavalry, 2,000 infantry, and a score of war elephants. But he cared little for numbers. What he wanted was blood and battle. He had never seen true war. His training had been confined to the palace yard archery drills, sparring matches, strategies inked on scrolls. This, however, was different. Each night they made camp near villages with smoldering fields and terrified farmers. Whispers followed them. "The prince is coming. The demon prince. The one who shows no mercy." He smiled when he heard it. Weeks passed before they reached the gates of Takshashila, the frontier city known for its scholars, artisans, and rebellion. Walls towered above them, scarred by flame and siege. Banners of the rebels fluttered from the ramparts. Ashoka stood before the gates, alone, and shouted, "Open your walls and return your loyalty to the Maurya throne, or I'll paint these gates with your entrails." The silence that followed was deep and long. Then came the clang of bolts and hinges. The gates opened. No blood was spilled, No swords crossed. The leaders of the revolt surrendered, terrified by Ashoka's reputation. But that night, in the city square, he made an example of them. Heads rolled, pillars were built with rebel bodies lashed atop. He left one hanging corpse for every village that had resisted Mauryan law. When word of his justice returned to Pataliputra, his brothers sneered, but Bindusara smiled. "He has the iron in him," the emperor said. "The others have silk." Ashoka returned a hero. The people chanted his name, and though the court tried to bury his deeds beneath gossip and shame, they could not ignore the truth. Ashoka was no longer just a bastard prince. He was a conqueror in the making, and destiny cruel, vast, and unrelenting had begun to stir in his shadow. The death of Bindusara was sudden, yet not unexpected. A fever had gripped him during the monsoon, and by the third week, he was drifting in and out of fevered visions. "I saw the throne crack," he whispered to his chief minister Radhagupta. "I saw blood where the lotus blooms." Radhagupta bowed solemnly. "Then we must act quickly." What followed was a bitter scramble for power. Ashoka's elder brothers moved first. Sumana claimed the throne with the support of several nobles, barricading the capital and declaring himself the rightful heir. Ashoka was not in the city. He was in Ujjain, governing as viceroy, but as soon as the news reached him, he acted with brutal precision. He marched east with a legion of loyal soldiers and stormed the outskirts of the capital within days. The city held its breath. Brothers clashed. Courtyards ran red. By the time the final sword was sheathed, Sumana lay dead, and 3 other brothers had vanished. Only Ashoka stood tall at the gates of Pataliputra, robed in blood-red armor, eyes fixed on the throne. Radhagupta met him at the palace steps. "It is done," he said. "The ministers have sworn allegiance. The court awaits." Ashoka stepped forward, his voice calm and clear. "Then let it be known, Ashoka Maurya, son of Bindusara, is now emperor." The coronation was a quiet affair, lacking the usual splendor. No golden elephants, no flowered processions, only fire, and the watchful gaze of thousands who feared what would come. For the first time in generations, the Maurya Empire was ruled by a man who had taken the throne not by inheritance, but by conquest. The early years of Ashoka's reign were marked by ambition, expansion, and ruthless consolidation. Like his grandfather Chandragupta before him, he dreamed of an empire that spanned the length of the subcontinent, from the Himalayas to the southern seas. But unlike Chandragupta, Ashoka possessed a hunger for permanence. He didn't just want to conquer. He wanted to build something that would outlast gods and men alike. And so he ruled with fire. Disloyal vassals were uprooted and replaced with governors loyal only to him. Spies roamed the provinces, ears open, mouths shut. Taxes flowed steadily into Pataliputra, funding roads, fortresses, and enormous granaries. Yet beneath the surface, murmurs of fear spread. Ministers spoke in whispers. Subjects bowed a little lower, not out of respect but out of dread. He married Devi of Vidisha, a noble woman with a calm spirit and gentle voice, whom he had met years earlier during his time as governor. Their union was quiet and tender at first. She bore him 2 children, Mahendra and Sangamitra, a boy and girl with eyes like their mother's, peaceful, curious, gentle. But Ashoka was not gentle, not anymore. "I married you for peace," he told her one night, pacing the marble terrace above the city. "But peace is earned with blood." Devi, wrapped in a saffron shawl, replied softly, "You are not at war anymore, my king." "Aren't I?" he said, pausing. "Every morning I wake, and there is a new rebellion, a new threat, a new lie spoken in the court." He clenched the rail. "I am surrounded by snakes." She stood beside him, touching his hand. "Then become a tree, not a fire. The snakes cannot touch what rises above them." Ashoka turned away. He didn't understand her peace. But soon he would come to need it more than he could ever know. The war that would change everything began in the 9th year of his reign. It started with a message from the southern coast. The kingdom of Kalinga, proud, ancient, and fiercely independent, refused submission to the Maurya crown. They had resisted for generations, hiding behind mountain passes and ocean cliffs. No emperor, not even Chandragupta, had dared to invade them. They were warriors of the sea and stone, known for their archers and swift-footed cavalry. Their people did not kneel. Ashoka took this as a challenge. "I will break Kalinga," he said to his generals, "and scatter its bones across the shore." He spent a full year preparing. Armies were summoned from every province. War elephants were fitted with steel-tipped tusks. Siege towers were built taller than temple spires. The empire itself seemed to tremble under the weight of Ashoka's ambition. Before departing, he kissed Devi's hand, though her eyes were filled with dread. "You are not the man I married," she whispered. "I am the man who will return victorious," he said. And then he was gone. The march to Kalinga took 3 months. The final battle lasted only 9 days. Ashoka's armies descended like thunder on the Kalingan defenses. Villages were razed. Soldiers were slaughtered without mercy. By the time his war elephants breached the capital gates, over 100 people had died. Tens of thousands more were taken as slaves. The Daya River, once pure and clear, ran red with blood. Ashoka stood on a hill above the carnage, surrounded by corpses and fire. A breeze carried the stench of death across his face. But there was no triumph in his eyes. Only silence. He dismounted slowly and walked among the dead. He saw children clinging to their mothers, both lifeless. He saw old men with their throats cut, still holding scriptures. He saw monks hanging from trees, set ablaze. And he fell to his knees. "What have I done?" he whispered. "What have I become?" No voice answered. Only the cawing of vultures overhead. Ashoka returned to Pataliputra, a changed man. The empire welcomed him with garlands and drums. Poets sang of his victory. Sculptors carved reliefs of his war. Elephants crushing the enemy beneath their feet. The people cheered. But Ashoka did not. He dismissed his generals. He walked the palace corridors like a ghost. He ate little, slept less. And one morning, he climbed the stone steps of a small monastery outside the city walls and sat before an old monk with a crooked spine and kind eyes. "I am the emperor," Ashoka said. "I know who you are," the monk replied, pouring tea. "I've conquered Kalinga." The monk nodded. "And in doing so," Ashoka said, staring into the steaming cup, "I have murdered 100,000 souls." Silence stretched between them. The monk sipped his tea. "And now?" Ashoka's hands trembled. "Now I cannot bear it." The monk's smile was small. "Then you are ready to begin." And so began Ashoka's transformation. He spent months in that monastery, listening to the teachings of the Buddha. He studied Dhamma, the law of right conduct. He meditated on suffering, on impermanence, on the emptiness of victory and power. He returned to the palace no longer a conqueror, but something else entirely. He gathered his ministers. "From this day forward," he said, "we shall govern with compassion, not fear. Let the prisons be emptied of the unjustly accused. Let the forests be protected. Let every man, woman, and child in this empire know peace." There was disbelief in the court, murmurs, confusion. But Ashoka's voice was clear. "No more blood," he said. "Not in my name." The transformation of Ashoka the Conqueror into Ashoka the Just was not instant. The empire had been built on conquest, its gears greased with fear and obedience. To change its course was like turning a great river. But Ashoka, once a boy who ran through palace corridors with fire in his heart, now bore the burden of immense clarity. His first act was to renounce all future wars of aggression. "I will not draw sword again to expand this empire," he declared from the royal balcony overlooking the city square. "Victory through arms is hollow. The only true conquest is over oneself." Some called him weak. Others thought him mad. The generals, especially, balked. But the people, those who had felt the edge of war, the weight of taxation, the sting of violence, they began to speak his name with a reverence not born of fear. he set about creating a new kind of empire. He appointed a special corps of officials, known as Dhamma Mahamatra's guardians, of morality tasked not with collecting taxes or punishing rebellion, but with promoting ethical behavior, fairness in governance, and religious tolerance. Edicts were carved into stone and iron pillars, erected across the realm in every tongue of the people from Greek to Prakrit. These pillars were not declarations of military triumph, but inscriptions of peace, kindness, and law. They proclaimed his regret over Kalinga, his desire to be a father to his people, and his resolve to treat all beings with compassion. He banned animal sacrifice in court rituals. He ordered the planting of medicinal herbs along trade routes, the digging of wells, the construction of rest houses and shade trees for weary travelers. Prisoners were allowed days of clemency. Widows were protected by decree. And he opened his heart to all faiths. "The roads to the truth are many," he wrote in one edict, "and all must be respected." His palace, once home to whispers and blood, became a place of learning. He invited monks, Brahmins, Jains, Greeks, and ascetics to debate philosophy and law in open forums. His daughter, Sanghamitra, grew close to the Bhikkhunis female Buddhist nuns and began studying the Dhamma herself. But not everyone rejoiced. Behind the marble serenity of Ashoka's new reign, old tensions simmered. The military elite had grown restless. Provinces that once feared imperial punishment began to question the limits of the emperor's gentleness. Trade guilds complained of excessive reforms. Brahmin priests whispered that the emperor favored the Buddhists too much. Even within his family, cracks widened. Devi, though pleased with Ashoka's turn toward peace, withdrew from court life. Her quiet faith, content in simplicity, did not fit the grand political theater that now unfolded under the Dhamma's banner. She retreated to Vidisha with their children, Mahendra and Sanghamitra, who had both embraced Buddhist teachings. Ashoka felt their absence like a hollow in his chest. He took other wives. His most ambitious, Tishyaraksha, was young, beautiful, and cunning. She admired his power but not his regrets. She whispered to him in moments of weakness. "Why mourn what brought you greatness?" she said. "The world remembers kings who built empires, not those who wept over them." Ashoka listened sometimes. In the long nights when ghosts of Kalinga returned to him, he wondered if peace would ever silence them. Then came news from the western border. A minor governor had refused to enforce one of Ashoka's edicts, claiming it weakened local authority. The man had raised his own banners and fortified his province. Ashoka's ministers advised immediate retribution. But the emperor hesitated. He sent envoys instead, not soldiers. He wrote personally to the governor, "You are not my subject by fear, but by Dharma. If I must punish, let it be with clarity, not rage. Reflect, return to the law, and I will embrace you as my brother." 3 weeks later, the governor submitted, voluntarily. Ashoka's words had won where swords might have failed. And yet, not all would yield so easily. Far to the south, new trouble stirred. The kingdom of Chola, rich in coastal spice and ivory, had begun to expand aggressively. Though they had never been fully subjugated by the Mauryas, they had maintained an uneasy peace for decades. Now, emboldened by Ashoka's pacifism, they encroached upon border territories and taxed Mauryan merchants unfairly. Ashoka refused to meet this with war, but he did not ignore it. He sent envoys to the Chola court bearing gifts, scripture, and scholars. Among them was his own son, Mahendra. The boy was now a young man, studious, calm, shaped more by his mother's wisdom than his father's fire. He traveled with a company of monks and healers, bearing not weapons but words. Their journey was long and perilous. Bandits struck their caravan outside Andhra. 2 monks were killed. Mahendra himself took an arrow to the shoulder before being rescued by a nearby village. Ashoka wept when he heard. "It is my fault," he said. "I sent him with no shield but faith." But Mahendra, wounded yet resolute, pressed on, and in time he reached not just Chola but beyond. He continued south to Lanka. There, in the court of King Devanampiyatissa, Mahendra spoke of the Buddha's teachings. He taught of compassion, renunciation, the wheel of life. He asked nothing in return, no tribute, no territory. And for the first time in Lanka's history, a foreign prince brought not conquest but awakening. Devanampiyatissa, moved by the young emissary's calm and truth, embraced the Dhamma. Monasteries were built, nuns and monks ordained. The island flourished as a center of Buddhist learning for centuries to come. Ashoka, when the news arrived, stood beneath the moonlit sky in the palace garden, alone. "I could not conquer the south," he whispered, "but my son has." He turned to the Bodhi tree he had planted years before, and he did it without spilling a single drop of blood. Ashoka's daughter, Sanghamitra, was not one to be left behind in her brother's shadow. Where Mahendra carried calm conviction, Sanghamitra carried quiet Fireya will as steady as it was unshakable. She had trained alongside the bhikkhunis in Vidisha, learning the Vinayathe rules of monastic life and studying the discourses of the Buddha with a clarity that surprised even the elder monks. When word reached Pataliputra that Mahendra had helped convert Lanka's king, Ashoka was overcome with pride. But it was Sanghamitra who came to him one evening and said, "If Lanka has accepted the Dhamma, it is time they receive the roots of the tree." Ashoka furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" "The Bodhi tree," she said, "under which the Buddha found awakening. Let me take a sapling of it to Lanka. As Mahendra has brought the word, I will bring the symbol." Ashoka's breath caught. The Bodhi tree in Pataliputra had been grown from a branch of the original in Bodh Gaya, living relic, sacred to all who followed the path. "To cut a part of it," he said, "is to spread its truth," she finished. And so, with great ceremony and reverence, the court gathered to witness the careful removal of a young sapling from the Bodhi tree. It was placed in a golden pot, protected with silk and water from the Ganges, and carried in a procession that stretched for miles. Sanghamitra, dressed in white, led the journey south. Her ship crossed the straits to Lanka, where she was received not as a visitor, but as a sacred emissary. She planted the Bodhi sapling in the capital of Anuradhapura, and under its shade, she ordained the first generation of Sinhalese nuns. The people of Lanka called her Teri Sanghamita, venerating her for generations. And in Pataliputra, Ashoka wept. "First my son, now my daughter," he said. "They have gone further than I ever could, not with armies, but with truth." He looked to the great wheel carved into his palace gate, the Dharmachakra. This is the empire I was meant to build." The later years of Ashoka's reign were marked not by conquest or law, but by a deepening commitment to the people's welfare. He commissioned thousands of edicts, each tailored to the land where it stood. In the mountains of the northwest, the edicts were carved in Greek and Aramaic. In the south, in Tamil and Brahmi. On rocks and iron pillars, across river crossings and market towns, the same message echoed: live with compassion, act with justice, respect all faiths. Ashoka did not simply preach these ideals, she enforced them. He created state-funded medical services for both humans and animals. Veterinary clinics were established in major cities. Physicians were dispatched to remote villages. Trees were planted every mile along royal roads, and shelters constructed for travelers. Prison reforms became mandatory. Regular reviews of wrongful imprisonments, humane treatment of inmates, and designated days for clemency. No emperor in Indian history had ever governed this way. But with peace came fragility. Without war, the military's influence waned. Some provincial governors began accruing more autonomy than Ashoka liked. His tolerance was mistaken by a few as weakness. Banditry grew in border regions. And within the palace, rival factions, some Brahmin, some political, resented the growing Buddhist influence in court. Ashoka, now graying and slower in step, met these tensions not with wrath, but with patience. He invited critics to speak freely. He instituted a royal council to mediate disputes between religious sects. But despite his efforts, old resentments smoldered. Even his wife Tishyaraksha, once a fiery supporter of his reign, grew restless. She complained that Ashoka had become a monk in king's clothing. "You used to command fear," she said one night. "Now you command pity." Ashoka looked out at the moonlight, spilling over the rooftops of Pataliputra. "Fear built walls," he said. "Pity builds bridges." As time passed, Ashoka's health began to fail. He limped through the palace now, aided by a carved sandalwood staff. His voice grew raspier, yet his mind remained sharp razor-edged and watchful. He spent his days dictating final edicts, mentoring scholars, and ensuring the Dhamma Mahamatras remained vigilant in their duties. One morning, a messenger arrived from Lanka. Mahendra had passed peacefully beneath the Bodhi tree he had planted. He had taught until his last breath. Ashoka received the news in silence. Later that evening, he wandered the garden alone, stopping beneath the Pataliputra Bodhi tree. He placed his hand on its trunk, eyes closed. "I sent you out into the world," he whispered, "and now you've returned to me in silence." He knelt, not as a king, but as a grieving father. A candle flickered beside him in the wind. In the weeks that followed, Sanghamitra returned briefly to Pataliputra, her face lined with age, but still luminous in spirit. She brought with her relics from her brother's monastery scrolls, robes, and a small clay bowl he had used daily. Ashoka clutched the bowl like it was a gem. "They carried more than my blood," he said. "They carried my redemption." He held Sanghamitra's hand tightly. "When I am gone, let the tree remain." "It will," she promised, "long after we are dust." Ashoka's final edict, carved onto a tall stone pillar in Lumbina, birthplace of the Buddha, read simply, "20 years after the conquest of Kalinga, I have seen the truth. Let this be known. The greatest conquest is the conquest of the self." The final year of Ashoka's life passed like the slow receding of a great tide. The emperor rarely left his chamber now. His legs ached, his breath was short, and his physicians, trained in both Ayurveda and foreign sciences, could do little more than ease his pain with crushed herbs and warm oils. Still, each morning he asked for reports from his governors and Dhamma Mahamatras. He insisted on reviewing construction of new roads, the welfare of prisoners, and the status of Buddhist missions sent as far as Central Asia and Egypt. His mind clung to the threads of the empire even as his body began to slip away. Radhagupta, his once young minister, now white-haired and stooped, visited him often. "You've done what no one before you dared," Radhagupta said one evening. "You transformed an empire not by conquest, but by conscience." Ashoka gave a faint smile. "Conscience does not leave monuments, old friend." "No," said Radhagupta, "but it leaves legacies." Ashoka looked toward the stone window lattice, through which the light of a single star shone. "Promise me," he said, "that after I am gone, the Dhamma pillars will stand untouched." "They will," Radhagupta replied. "They will speak long after our bones are gone." The emperor nodded slowly. "Then I am ready." He passed away not long after on a quiet morning, as jasmine petals drifted on the breeze and monks chanted softly in the temple nearby. There were no royal fanfares, no grand pyres. As he had requested, his cremation was simple, attended by family, monks, and loyal servants. His ashes were divided and placed in stupas across the empire. Some said the sky turned gray that day. Others claimed the Bodhi tree dropped more leaves than usual. But none doubted the truth. Ashoka, the once feared warrior prince, the butcher of Kalinga, had become a sage king beloved across the known world. After Ashoka's death, the Maurya Empire began to change. Though his grandson Dasharatha took the throne, he lacked his grandfather's vision and moral conviction. The network of Dhamma Mahamatras began to wither. Governors turned their focus back to taxes and military control. Factionalism returned to the court like mold to damp stone. And yet something endured. The stone edicts remained. Travelers from far and wide, pilgrims and merchants, paused beside them, reading the words carved into iron and granite. One must respect the faith of another. Let no man exalt his own by bringing harm to others. All men are my children, And just as I wish happiness for my own children in this world and the next, so too I wish it for all. These teachings, scattered across the land, planted seeds that even neglect could not choke. In Lanka, the Bodhi tree brought by Sanghamitra grew wide and strong. It shaded monasteries for centuries, and still stands to this day, its roots touching both earth and legend. In lands beyond the Himalayas, where Buddhist missionaries had traveled guided by Ashoka's vision, new schools of thought took root. In Gandhara, in Bactria, in China and Tibet, echoes of the emperor's Dhamma spread, long after his empire had faded. Ashoka became more than a name in a royal ledger. He became a symbol. In later centuries, when India was ruled by other kings, Hindu, Muslim, British's memory would return again and again. Historians would rediscover his edicts. Archaeologists would find his lion capital, the one that now crowns the modern Indian Republic's emblem. The Dharma chakra would appear on the national flag. And Ashoka, forgotten by his immediate successors, would rise again not in palaces or armies, but in the hearts of those who believe in the quiet power of righteousness. But before he was legend, before edicts, before regret was a boy in a palace, chasing his own shadow. And so the story comes full circle. In the early spring, decades after his death, a traveling monk from the south arrived in Pataliputra. He had come to pay homage to the Bodhi tree and study at the ruins of the old monastic halls Ashoka had built. The city had changed, walls crumbling, markets faded, but the memory of the emperor lived on in stories told by elders and scribbled on half-faded manuscripts. At the tree's base, the monk met an old gardener who still tended the sacred roots. "You came to see the tree?" the gardener asked. "Yes," the monk said, "and the place where a great king found peace." The gardener nodded slowly. "He was many things," he said. "Cruel, brilliant, terrifying. But in the end, he was kind." They sat beneath the shade together, silent. Wind rustled through the leaves. The gardener added, almost to himself, "I think he would have liked to be remembered that way." The monk smiled, fingers brushing the stone at his side, where Ashoka's final edict lay half buried in moss and time. "He is," the monk said. And in the distant sky, a flock of birds rose into the air free, unburdened, and endless.